Welcome to part 2 of the value of interest groups. In the first part, we looked at interest groups and civic participation, the pluralist theory versus the elite theory. Now we are going to look at the key functions of interest groups. Many Americans join interest groups, and yet interest groups have a generally negative reputation. For example, it has been said of many a politician that he or she is in the pockets of the special interests. This statement suggests that the politician is not making decisions based on conscious or the public interest, but rather has been bought. This notion is closely linked to the ideas held by the elite theorists who argue that elites' disproportionate share of influence negatively affects the ability of the average Jill or Joe to get the government to do what he or she wants. Yet despite the criticisms frequently leveled by politicians, pundits, and the populace about interest groups' efforts to influence government, they serve several vital functions in the policy-making process in the United States. Interest groups educate the public about policy issues. Messages from interest groups abound. For example, thanks to organizations such as Mothers Against Drunk Driving, or MAD, most people are aware of the dangers of drunk driving. In educating the public, interest groups often provide a vehicle for civic discourse, so that genuine dialogue about policy problems and potential solutions is part of the national agenda. Interest groups provide average citizens with an avenue of access to activism. Anyone can join or form an interest group. Although wealthy and well-educated people are most likely to do so, interest groups can speak for all kinds of people on all kinds of issues. Historically, in the United States, groups have been significant forces for advocates of civil rights for African Americans, as well as for supporters of equal rights for women, gays and lesbians, and ethnic minorities. Even you and your fellow students can form an interest group. At Swarthmore College, a small number of students formed the Genocide Intervention Network, a group concerned about the genocide in Darfur that became a full-fledged interest group. Interest groups mobilize citizens and stimulate them to participate in civic and political affairs. Some people are turned off by politics because they feel that neither the Democratic nor the Republican Party represents their views. In these cases, interest groups with their typically narrower area of focus can sometimes fill the void. Moreover, interest groups nurture community involvement by encouraging the formation of local chapters of larger interest groups. They support public education activities by private citizens. And interest groups not only can facilitate the ongoing conversation of democracy between people and their government officials, but also encourage voting. Interest groups perform electoral functions. By endorsing and rating candidates and advertising their positions, interest groups provide voters with cues as to which candidates best represent their views. Interest groups also mobilize campaign volunteers and voters. These activities facilitate informed civic participation. Interest groups provide information and expertise to policymakers. The private sector often has greater resources than the public sector and can be a source of meaningful data and information for policymakers or pressing social issues. Interest groups can protect the common good. The federal government is structured so that only one individual, the president, is elected from a national constituency. Interest groups can work to protect the nation's interests as a whole rather than just the needs of a specific constituency. Interest groups are an integral part of the government system of checks and balances. Interest groups can often check one another's influence with competing interests, and they can similarly check the actions of policymakers. Let's look at the downside of interest groups. Despite the valuable functions of interest groups, certain criticisms of these organizations are valid. Interest groups do contribute to the appearance of, and sometimes the reality of, corruption in the political system. Indeed, there are various criticisms of the interest group state. Former President Jimmy Carter bemoaned the influence of special interests, saying they are the single greatest threat to the proper functioning of our democratic system. And former President Ronald Reagan charged that interest groups are placing out of focus our constitutional balance. Another criticism is that interest groups and their political action committees, or PACs, fundraising arms, which we will briefly discuss in a later chapter, make money a vital force in American politics. By contributing large sums of money to political campaigns, interest groups, PACs make campaigns expensive and often lopsided. Candidates without well-stuffed campaign war chests have a difficult, if not impossible, task in challenging those who receive large PAC contributions. Money also changes the nature of campaigns, making them less engaging for citizens on a grassroots level and more reliant on the mass media. These concerns have been exacerbated by a 2010 U.S. Supreme Court ruling that enables corporations and labor unions to spend money freely on political ads supporting or targeting candidates for federal office, and allows corporations and unions to issue advertisements even in the last days of political campaigns. Critics, including President Obama, say these rule changes will increase the importance of money in political campaigns and will enable corporations to exert greater influence over the electoral process. That was the Citizens United case. Interest groups, moreover, are faulted with strengthening the advantages enjoyed by incumbents. Most interest groups want access to policymakers regardless of these elected officials' party identification, realizing that the people already in office are likely to be reelected. Interest groups use their resources disproportionately to support incumbent candidates. Doing so increases incumbency advantage even further by improving the odds against a challenger. Remember that incumbency advantage means the advantage that the people that are already in office have. Finally, although the option to form an interest group is open to any and all activists and would-be activists, elites are more likely to establish and to dominate interest groups than are non-elites. This fact skews the policy process in favor of elites. Interest group activism is much more prominent among the wealthy, the white, the upper middle class, and the educated than among the poor, the non-white, and the working class, and less educated. Although internet-based interest groups have been particularly effective in attracting young people and others not traditionally drawn to such organizations, many of the most effective national interest groups remain dominated by traditional interest group populations.